So let's get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name's Ruby. I'm an occupational therapist in the Battersea Mental Health Support Team, and I'm with my colleague Nilly, who will introduce herself also.
Yes, I'm Nilly and I'm an education and wellbeing practitioner, and I also work in Battersea Mental Health Support Team.
And we've also got Chantal, one of our other educational wellbeing practitioners, who is going to be helping us to moderate. So I just want to give you a brief overview of the service. The Battersea Mental Health Support Team is an early intervention service and prevention service for children and adolescents for their mental health. So we cover over 20 schools in the Battersea area and offer a range of different support, including parent-led guided self-help for children and young people experiencing anxiety or behavioural difficulties or low mood, and workshops such as this for parents, and also workshops, support and training for school staff around children's emotional well-being. In today's session, as you can see, and as you already know, it's titled Lockdown Learning, Coping with Uncertainty and Motivation. So we'll be talking about some of the things that we know parents and young people might be struggling with at the moment regarding learning in lockdown. It's important to remember that all teenagers are different, and so some of the examples we give today might fit with the experiences of your teenager, but also, you know, there may be some differences and there may be things that we don't quite cover. We won't be able to cover everything today. We're not focusing so much on the academic side, but more thinking about how you can support your child with their emotional well-being and helping them to be in a place where they might be able to better learn. We've got lots to cover, and we wanted to make sure we included lots of helpful things for everyone. And that also means that in some parts of the presentation we can't go into loads and loads of depth, but we will post further resources where relevant in the chat, and there will also be the YouTube video available afterwards. So just some quick housekeeping. Please stay on mute unless you're speaking or asking a question, which will come at the end. We're hoping the presentation should last 45-50 minutes, with then 10-15 minutes for questions and answers. Please put your questions in the chat, and then Chantal can moderate them and we can get to them at the end. Also, there is a feedback form that it would be really great if people could fill out. That will also get posted in the chat, and I'll remind you at the end as well. Okay, so the plan for this session is we'll have a little think about some of the challenges of lockdown learning and the impact on young people. Then we will speak about how you can help as parents, in particular managing uncertainty, keeping motivated, a little bit about regulation, and also looking after yourself, because that's a really important thing that we wanted to touch on as well. And then hopefully, as I said, we might have some time for questions. So I'm going to hand over to Nilly to begin.
Thank you, Ruby. I hope you can all hear me. So what we wanted to start this presentation by is just acknowledging some of the challenges that the current circumstances have thrown our way. So we know that everyone is facing challenges with the global pandemic and experiencing prolonged stress. So we've highlighted some of the challenges that teenagers may be experiencing right now on this slide. So things like you might have a change of routine, lack of motivation is probably quite common, increased screen time, and limited social interaction. So you or your teenager may have felt that even before lockdown, things were either thriving and you were doing really well, or maybe there were some issues in different parts of life even before lockdown. but I think it's fair to say that the pandemic has added extra stresses for everyone. And what we've heard from parents in particular, or the biggest challenge, is that they are trying to play many different roles. So as a parent, you might be a teacher, a parent, you might be working and everything else in the middle, and you might be doing all these different roles at the same time. So this is not only confusing and stressful, but also something parents may not feel prepared for. So most parents who are homeschooling did not make this decision. It's something that's sort of happened because of the pandemic, and schools, children, parents, situation. Sorry, did I cut out? Hopefully not. So school, parents and children are all in a very challenging situation, and we can maybe think of this as crisis education as opposed to homeschooling. So on the next slide, we're going to look at some common feelings. This slide shows us some of the common feelings and experiences young people will currently be going through. So consider where your as you can see, they're all popping up on the screen. So there's feelings like worried, confused, excluded, frustrated. So you might want to consider where your teenager, so as your teenager is developing at the moment, they might be missing out on normal experiences that they are due to have, such as end of school activities, sitting exams that they might be preparing for, and thinking about that, all of these feelings are actually very, very understandable. So in particular, there will have been big changes to young people's routines. They may be more likely to be feeling low and worried. And together, it's likely that this would have affected how much sleep your young person is getting at the moment. It's important to remember that all of these feelings are very common amongst teenagers right now. It may be helpful to think about whether you've noticed any of these feelings in your teenager, or even whether you've noticed some of these feelings yourself in response to lockdown. I think as adults, we struggle too, so it's important to think about that. So now we're going to look at briefly some common thoughts around COVID-19 and just struggling. So I want you to think about what your teenager might have thought about the current situation. So what might their thoughts be? And we're going to have some pop up on the screen in a minute. It might be that some of your thoughts came up, so you might be able to look at the thoughts and actually they might resonate with you. So for example, what grade will I get if I don't do the exams? What will I do with all my spare time? Or, my parents are driving me crazy if everyone's home all the time. So I think these are quite common thoughts. And parents may not have considered what their teenager may be thinking during this time. And it may help to consider this in order to understand why your young person might be feeling or behaving in a certain way. So now we're going to look quite quickly at some common behaviors. So you might have noticed a change in your young person or in your teenager over the last couple of weeks, maybe even year, as lockdown has been quite long now. Your young person might not want to get out of bed. They might be arguing, shouting, or storming off a lot more. They might be avoiding demands or even avoiding tasks that are really anxiety provoking. But there is more on the list there that might resonate with you. So what Ruby's going to look at next is what you can do as a parent.
So yeah, what can you do as parents? We're going to cover a few of the following topics. So we're going to talk about the basics and just kind of sticking to the basics and that being okay, including the sleep routine. Then we will move on to managing uncertainty and anxiety, followed by supporting motivation, and we'll also talk about regulating the nervous system. And lastly, we want to talk about parent self-care. So starting with the basics, There's so much to worry about at the moment, and it can be really, really overwhelming. And focusing on the basics is sometimes the most important place to start. We know that it is very hard for human beings to learn or to function at a optimal level if their basic needs are not met. So this means encouraging good sleep, eating and drinking in a balanced way, encouraging your young person to get out of bed, get out into the daylight, open the curtains, especially when it's dark early at the moment. And also remembering that joy is an essential human need. So it's okay if your child is really stuck or really struggling, to focus on helping them to engage in the things that make them feel joyful or that they enjoy. And when there tends to be quite a big emphasis on academic work and a lot of anxieties around falling behind or succeeding in schoolwork, it can seem really counterintuitive to focus on these things first, and to prioritize these steps before engaging in work. But from what we know about how our bodies and brains work, we know that they need to be regulated and meet these needs on the building blocks on the slide, before they can engage in anything higher level. So sticking with the basics, I wanted to talk a little bit about supporting young people to build a good sleep routine and include good sleep hygiene. So there's a few tips. So one of the best ways of doing this is trying not to get them to sleep earlier, but instead waking them up earlier. So someone, if they try and go to bed earlier, they it's very hard to force your body to sleep. Whereas if you wake up early, you're more likely to be tired in the evening, and then it's easier to get your sleep back on track. Similarly, no napping goes hand in hand with this, and it's really important to encourage your child not to nap in the day, as it will make them find it much harder to get to sleep in the evening. We also really, really recommend for anyone struggling to improve their sleep routine that you only use your bed for sleeping. So this is because your brain needs to learn to associate your bed with sleeping and not with being on your phone or watching TV or doing your homework. So if your child spends a lot of time awake in bed, it might be useful to work with your child, and find them a different space in the house where they can feel comfortable to do those activities while they're awake. And no screens before bed is generally a good rule as well. Sleep is obviously really important, but we don't have much time to go in any more depth today. Chantel will post a sleep routine video in the comments now, so if anyone is interested or would find that useful, you can go to that video. So we'll move on to dealing with feelings of worry and uncertainty, and I'll hand back to Nilly.
Thank you. So we are all facing a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and you may have worries such as, when will all of this end, and will my loved ones be okay? So we know that adolescents are also dealing with uncertainty about when will they go back to school, if exams will go ahead, and if they will have an opportunity to catch up on all the things that they've missed out on. And some things they might be able to, and some things they might not. We also know that as human beings, we crave security. We want to feel safe and have a sense of control over our lives and our well-being. So fear and uncertainty can leave us feeling stressed, anxious, and powerless. And people who get caught up in the what if and the worst case scenarios about the future and what might happen in the future. So we might get caught up in that. So thinking, oh, what if I did this, or what if this happens, or really worrying about the future. What if I never get a job? If you're a young person who's thinking about exams right now. And one way that people often try to cope with uncertainty is to worry about things. This makes us feel like we have some control over the situation, trying to predict the future and to avoid nasty surprises. This seems like, or this makes you feel like you have some control over uncertain circumstances. However, we know that even though you might be looking for a solution, so although you may believe it will help you find a solution to your problem, or even make you feel prepared for the worst possible case, in the long term, this will only make you feel worse. So worrying doesn't really help in the long term. So instead, we're going to look at emotional validation. The first step in supporting your young person with uncertainty and the worry and anxiety associated with that is to validate their emotions. Now, validation involves recognizing and accepting the emotion. So this communicates clearly to another person that their feelings and thoughts make sense and are understandable. It allows parents to let their child know that as a parent you get it. Even if you disagree with their actions, that you understand why, I guess. When talking about thoughts and feelings, try to remember not to judge, criticize, ridicule, ignore, lecture, or dismiss. And it sounds simple, but it's easy to forget this. And sometimes our instinct is to say something like, get on with it. It could be worse. Why are you being so dramatic? Or we might say, don't be silly. Why are you getting so upset? And this can make a teenager feel like they aren't being listened to, that we don't understand. And this can then make it harder for your teenager to accept help from you or to open up and share how they are feeling with you, maybe in the future. So looking at emotional validation, the main concept of validation is to really listen to what is being expressed and being completely present. So that means not being distracted or half in the conversation, looking at your phone whilst you're having a conversation, which I think a lot of us do, but being fully present. Allow your child to express their feelings, acknowledging what they are saying, and summarizing what you think they are feeling, showing that you are taking how they are feeling seriously and that their emotions and behavior are valid. So even if you don't understand why they feel the way they do, because it can be difficult to understand another person's perspective, it's still really important to acknowledge the feeling and that they matter. Some examples of this are shown, as you can see, and it can include things like, I can see you're really upset about this, or I understand it can be really scary trying new things. So on the next slide, we're going to have a look at control. So there are lots of strategies that can help you and your young person manage worries and uncertainty. We are going to focus on just two because we only have so much time, and this is one of them. As we said, we like to have control and certainty as human beings, but often that's not the case, especially at the moment where there is so much uncertainty and there's only so much we can control. A helpful activity can be to distinguish between what you do have control over and what you cannot control. So once you have done this, it can be helpful to focus on the things you can control and trying to let go of the things that you can't. So this is an activity that you can use to support your teenager to engage in when things are uncertain, like at the moment. On this slide, there is an example of what you can do in each bubble, or what can go in each bubble. So for example, in terms of things that I can't control or things that are outside of my control, this usually relates to other people. So you can't control what somebody else does. You can't control whether someone in the supermarket follows social distancing guidelines or the social distancing rules. But things you can control is your attitude and your response to things. So whatever the situation is, you can control your response and outlook. And similarly to the other example, you can control whether you follow the rules, and you can control how much time you spend watching the news and worrying about COVID and stuff like that. So next, hopefully you've had enough time to read, but next we're going to look at a simple example, and we're going to try and talk you through how to do this so that you could do this at home with your child, teenager, both. So this is a blank version that you can draw out with your young person. So all you need is 2 circles and just a little box at the bottom. Engaging in a task such as this can support the young person in developing a greater sense of agency over their challenges and help them and support them to basically take meaningful action. So it's a way of getting control over a situation that you don't have much control over instead of worrying. So the very first step is, when faced with a problem or challenge, get your young person to start listing all the things that are actually outside of their control. So everything that would go in the red bubble. So everything outside of their control. And suggest that they make time to actually articulate their frustrations regarding those things. So something outside your control, and what are the feelings attached to that. And then the second step is to encourage them to take a breath and then begin to consider all the options that are within their control. So what actions or responses can they take to address the situation? What are the resources at their disposal? Ask them to list a number of actions that they can take to respond or begin to restore the situation. And then the final step is to plan 2 specific and measurable positive actions that they can take to improve the situation. Now, this is really helpful in terms of shifting the locus of control back to the young person or the individual, so you feel a greater sense of control over the situation. So, for example, if we were thinking about revising for an exam, some things that might go in the can't control circle would be if the exams will go ahead. What grade will I get if they don't? Or what questions will be in the exam? You have no control over that. But things that are within your control or within the young person's control are how much time you spend revising, when you start revising, how, maybe using flashcards or highlighting every single thing in your book, so how you revise, but also how you manage your own mental health and stress. And therefore, 2 positive actions might be deciding that you will revise and make a plan on how you're going to do that, but also to find some relaxation techniques and maybe do a 10-minute relaxation exercise every day, for example. Now, this can be used for many problems or difficulties or difficult situations. And the challenge to let go or accept the thing that aren't in your control is kind of difficult, but we are going to talk about what you can do. So with the things that you can't control, we can think about mindfulness and learning to let go or accept them, but we'll talk about that later. So firstly, we're going to talk about problem solving. So I don't know if anyone has heard of this before, but problem solving, we use this strategy when the things that we are worried about are very realistic. So the worries that could actually happen. So as you can see, there are 7 steps. So for example, if the young person is nervous that they will not be able to see their friends in the new bubble. So if I know that was a worry a little while ago during the first lockdown. So it's more than anything, it's really important to remember to validate your child's emotions first before we go into problem solving. So it's really, really important that before you problem solve your child's worries, you spend time just listening, empathizing with them, and your teenager will often feel frustrated or angry if you immediately jump to trying to fix their problem, because everybody wants to feel heard. They want to feel understood before you try to solve the problem. So it'll be really nice if you and your teenager spend some time really trying to understand what is the problem and then trying to solve it. So make sure when you problem solve that you are both calm and that your teenager is actually engaged. If you're both angry or frustrated, it's not going to work. And once you have spent time listening to your teenager, you could suggest what would work together is that you try problem solving. So you've got a problem, you've validated their feelings and, really empathized. Now suggest problem solving. It's important to do this in a very collaborative way. We know that if young people are invested, it's going to work. And if they're not, it's very, very difficult to see changes. So ask to do things together, and what can you do together to basically solve this problem? What we're going to do is on the next slide, we're going to talk through an example and some solutions. Okay, so in this example, we've used the problem, I have too much work to do, I can't get it all done. So I don't know how relatable this might be to you or your young person. So as we said, the very first step is to list all the possible solutions. So you can really allow your young person to take the lead, and you can just encourage them, this is your problem. What are all the conceivable solutions, regardless of how weird and wonderful? So here we have 3 examples. The first one is to continue avoiding it. Second is to create a time machine and add more hours into the day. And then the last one is to go through a diary to work out what you can reschedule. So once you've got a list of all the solutions, you move on to the next stage, which is to think about the pros and cons of each solution. So for continuing to avoid it, it's great because you'll have more time to actually do the things you want to do. So if you avoid work, you can go watch Netflix. On the negative side, you'll still feel anxious and you'll probably still have to do the work at some point. And then in terms of time machine, it's great, but really we don't have the technology, and it will be a lot of hard work creating a time machine. And the last one, using a timetable to reschedule some things. The positives is that you will probably be able to find time to face my fear, which will allow me to feel less anxious, which is obviously really great. On the negative side, I may have to miss out on something more fun. So maybe I can't watch an episode of Netflix because I have to do my work. And then we think about how doable is this plan? So how realistic is this plan, and can I do it or not? So as you can see, the time machine is a no because it doesn't exist, but there are 2 yeses. So we can either pick the continue to avoid it or to reschedule some items in the diary. And you might have more. So you rate each one out of 10 based on how good the plan is and how helpful it would be in terms of solving your problem. So naturally, I would pick the diary solution because I think that works. But you might decide to avoid it, and that's okay. So wherever your child decides to pick, and you can, I guess, nudge them a little bit, it's really important to come back and review what happened. So if you pick the continue to avoid it, okay, great, you avoided your work for 3 days. What really happened? Now you have so much more work to do, or maybe you're in trouble with your teacher. Okay, so let's think of a new solution, or pick a new solution, which could be go to the diary, if that was to happen. I hope that makes sense. We're going to move on now to mindfulness. Okay. So as you mentioned this earlier, if there are things that are outside of your control, mindfulness can be really great. And practicing mindfulness is a valuable tool for dealing with stress, anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. It can help with accepting the situation and letting go rather than getting caught up in the worries. it can be useful to use this when things are identified as obviously not in your control or a worry you can't do anything about. So if you can do something about it, consider problem solving. If not, this is the alternative. When we practice mindfulness, we learn that much of the chatter in our mind is just that, it's chatter. It's not reality, it's just worry and anxiety. There are many, many useful apps and YouTube videos and audios that you can use with your young person to develop skills or mindfulness skills. So one particular one that we thought might be quite helpful is the leaves on a stream exercise. My colleague will shortly post that in the group chat, so there will be a link, a YouTube link that you can watch and go through. It might be helpful for you to watch and then share this with your young person or do it together afterwards. So this is a really nice exercise, young people to just observe their thoughts without getting caught up in them, encouraging them to place each thought on the leaf and watch it pass by, acknowledging the thought, but not judging or engaging with it. So hopefully the video will go into a bit more detail. And then we have relaxation. So we'll talk about 4 different things quite briefly, just so we touch on everything, but there is also a video that we will post later. So we know that worry and anxiety can have an impact on our body. It can trigger our body's fight or flight response, which results in an increase in heart rate, blood pressure, breathing erratically, as well as muscle tension. You might feel sweaty and feeling really hot. It can also cause our thoughts to race and sometimes lose contact with the present moment. So breathing techniques are a powerful tool to help bring stability and grounding to the present moment. So when we feel stressed, we are more likely to take deep but shallow breaths. So we might have almost erratic or very quick breathing. Taking a few minutes to focus on our breath and slowing it down by taking slow, deep breath through your nose, holding it, and a long breath out through your mouth can really change the way you're feeling in your body. Progressive muscle relaxation is also another great way to help with stress that builds up in our body. So a lot of the times you might carry stress in our shoulders, our arms, legs, wherever it might be. So the goal is to tighten and then relax different muscle groups one at a time in a specific pattern. This is really helpful because the goal is to release tension from your muscles whilst helping you to recognize what the tension actually feels like. So again, there are some YouTube videos that really talk you through how to do this. And then grounding is also a really lovely one that we encourage. So when children feel particularly anxious, they may feel overwhelmed with what they are experiencing and might find it hard to concentrate or focus, and they may get really caught up in their thoughts or with the physical sensation in their body due to anxiety. And grounding techniques can help break that and bring the person back to the present moment. So a really lovely one is the 5 senses. I'm going to quickly talk through this and then you might not have time for the flow one, but I really like this one. So if you have time, you can do this with me now. So we're going to look at the 5 senses. So maybe right now, have a look at 5 things that you can see around you. And then look for 4 things that you can physically touch. Look for 3 things you can hear. So my voice, background noise, kids screaming, I don't know. And 2 things that you can smell. So whatever you can smell around you, and 1 thing that you can taste. So again, this is a really great activity to bring you back to the present moment. And flow activities are very similar, but it will be in the video. So we're going to move on, just so we don't run out of time, to motivation.
Thank you, Lily. So now we're going to move on to motivation. we've heard lots of parents talk about how they're having a lot of difficulties with their children and young people around motivation. And it's really not surprising, considering it's not really clear what they're working towards at the moment. Lots of them don't know if their exams have been cancelled, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. So one way to think about motivation is through the mood and activity link. And we know that there's a link between the things we do and the way we feel. So in lockdown, adults and young people have found their normal routine is completely turned upside down, and they haven't been able to do the things that usually bring them enjoyment. So when people are doing less of the activities that they enjoy, and they're not able to see their friends, they get less of the feel-good factor from life, and their mood may start to drop. And as a person moods drops, their energy levels and their motivation also will drop. And this can lead to them withdrawing from even more activities or socializing. And of course, this further contributes to their mood dropping, and the negative feelings become stronger. So as you can see, it's a real cycle, and it can be really difficult to break out of. And we know during lockdown, this has been really difficult, and it's been harder than usual for people to find a routine and to do the things that make them feel good and that would normally help them break out of this vicious cycle. There are, however, ways as parents you can help your teenagers to start to break out of this cycle. So, for example, helping them find activities that matter to them, and trying to help them plan how to incorporate those activities into their life, and maybe that would help them to start to rebuild a routine. We'll go into this all a little bit more in the next few slides. So thinking about breaking out of the cycle and encouraging motivation, a few things that can be helpful to think about are firstly regulation. So encouraging the use of self-regulation techniques, whether that's emotional or sensory, and I'm going to come on to a little bit about that later, especially if their motivation seems to be affected by their mood, or having quite like low energy levels or quite too high energy levels. And some of the techniques that Nili's already discussed, like mindfulness and breathing techniques and things like that, will be helpful, as well as some of the techniques I'm going to come on to. So control and meaning is really key to motivation, and allowing young people choice over what they do in their day can really help. It can make them feel more in control of what's going on in their lives and make their routine more meaningful when things feel quite out of control at the moment. I think encouragement and praise are always good to remember. Praise when things are going well. It helps it continue. Also rewards, and I don't mean like buying presents or anything. It doesn't have to be like that, but it might just be having a break from their work to watch their favorite program, or having their favorite thing for dinner, just to encourage that continuation when things are going well. Small positive things. Chunk work can be a really good thing to encourage if your teenager or child is feeling really stressed. Breaking work down into smaller chunks and having regular breaks, it kind of encourages that balance and makes everything feel a little bit more manageable and less overwhelming. It's also worth thinking about environmental factors in terms of motivation, because things like limiting distractions and having a quiet space to work with like reduced screens. So obviously they might need to use their computer for online lessons, but maybe not having their phone around. It can kind of help to focus a little bit more. And lastly, creating a routine and structure for the day. Having a plan and a predictable routine is really helpful and can be actually really reassuring. it kind of lets everyone be secure about the plans for the day. And it is good if you can encourage your young person to look at their own routine themselves and kind of do that independently. It can also be helpful if it's visual, because if you think about it, at school they kind of have times and dates and what's kind of coming next on the board. And yeah, I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about what else you can include in a routine now. So we know from working with young people, especially when they're dealing with low mood or anxiety, that they can still be active, but they can still feel low. And this tends to happen when a young person is doing lots of things they don't feel are necessarily important, or they feel a lot of pressure to do something by like the external, for example, academic work, or they're spending too much time focusing on one area of their life and they don't necessarily have that balance. So other areas of their life aren't getting enough attention. And if you notice these things happening, it can be really helpful to encourage your child to have a balance of valued activities across different life areas. So valued activities can be kind of divided into three categories. So you have the things that matter. Some of these things are things we have to do as well. So education, work, things you need to do like tidying your room, helping your parents with chores, and then also thinking about the bigger picture, other things that might be important to you, like your religion, politics, and things like environmental issues. And then next, it's good to include in a routine the people that matter, friends, family, pets, and thinking about how you can spend quality time together, because I know we're all at home a lot of the time and we feel like we're all spending a lot of time together, but it might be nice to set aside 10 minutes of like quality time where you're like really present as part of a routine. That can be really helpful. And lastly, it's really important to include me or them at the centre. So thinking about what are their important hobbies or things they find fun, also including physical health, exercise, and leaving time for relaxing. So having a good routine, as we've mentioned, helps young people know what they need to do and what's expected of them, but it also can be a really good way of incorporating activities into their lives that are meaningful and enjoyable, and maybe make them feel a bit more positive and motivated. It's important to keep in mind, though, that they might be feeling lots of different ways at the moment, and it can be really hard to jump straight into a consistent routine. So keep in mind the emotional validation that we've already talked about, and kind of spend time listening to why they're not motivated or what they're finding difficult about engaging in a routine. We have to be prepared to take some small steps to begin with. So little changes and build them up. And it can be really difficult to get anyone, but particularly teenagers, to start doing activities again, especially when they're really having really low motivation. And also the conversation about why they're not motivated can also be really hard. So we're just going to go on to talk a little bit about how you might broach that topic. So this situation might be familiar to you. My teenager refuses to do their work or to exercise. And there can be loads of reasons why someone's unmotivated. And so what they need to help them can really vary. And it is important to kind of work out what's going on first before you can put in any strategies. So to get to the bottom of it, we've kind of highlighted a few stages that can help you have that conversation. So number one, make sure you're both calm when you're discussing it. and it's likely to make the conversation more productive. Understand the context, what's going on in their lives, ask them and listen. Use the emotional validation techniques, and this can really help you to understand what's going on underneath the low motivation. Similarly, asking questions such as if they would like things to be different, and if so, and how. Be curious about what's getting in the way of them engaging in their work or with exercise. Show empathy for their position. Like you might say, you know, that sounds really tough, that you're feeling like you're not very good at maths, so you don't want to attend, or it's really hard that you can't see your friends. And then when you've worked out the problem, it can be really helpful to use the problem solving techniques that we've discussed earlier. And this kind of helps you start with small steps and build it up, and then you can think about what strategies you can use for their motivation. So I'm just briefly going to touch on regulating the nervous system, hoping we have enough time. So regulation of the body is one of those kind of fundamental needs that we spoke about at the very beginning with those building blocks. And before any of us can learn or do functional tasks, our bodies, especially if we think about our central nervous system, they have to be in a regulated state. So this means feeling calm and alert, and in the middle of this rainbow that you can see on the slide, which is the place where we can focus and learn and listen and do daily tasks. However, if your body is feeling dysregulated, it can be really hard to process other skills, and including academic learning. It can also be hard to regulate our emotions and our focus and our energy levels and behaviour. In stressful times, it's expected that people will be dysregulated more often, because our nervous system and our body are already feeling stressed, and little things can kind of set us off so much more. And this applies to young people as well. And so it's normal to have a smaller window of tolerance during stressful times. When we're dysregulated, it can present in different ways, and these can broadly be broken down into low, where your nervous system is running slower than normal, and someone here might present as low energy. They might be lethargic, doing things slowly. They might be sleepy or withdrawn, and they also might show a lot of like low emotions, like feeling sad, and having low mood. And then on the other side, you have the where you see high, and this is when the nervous system is running faster than normal. And sometimes we call this high arousal. Someone might be quite high energy here. They might be really hyper and not able to sit still, but they also might be really anxious with racing thoughts, distracted, frustrated, and even like quite angry or agitated. So I want to go through a few strategies that you can help if your teenager is kind of in either of these states. So we'll talk about the high arousal state first, where your nervous system is running faster than normal. Maybe breathing has sped up, the mind is scanning for threats, and your heart's beating really fast. So this might present as your child being regularly distracted from the work they're meant to be doing. They can't focus. Maybe they seem like they're really on edge all the time. They're getting really overwhelmed and having a lot of stressful thoughts, like racing thoughts. And maybe they're more irritable or frustrated or angry than normal. And this is really hard as a parent, because you want your child to concentrate on their lessons, and it can also be distressing to see them being really overwhelmed, especially if it gets to the point of anger or emotional breakdown. So there are obviously a lot of different things going on here, and we know teenagers deal with a lot of emotions generally. And there might not be one clear solution to these difficulties. However, some calming strategies for the nervous system when someone's in this state are a break away from stimulus and reducing input. So this means somewhere quiet with reduced input, lower lighting, reduced screens, like a neutral heat, so like room temperature, and also reducing expectations and demands. So allowing your teenager to set aside the work they might be doing that's like got them really, really stressed out, and suggesting they do something that relaxes them, or kind of go to their room and go somewhere where they might have less stimulus, and or they might want to do something they feel they can't fail in, so those demands just kind of are alleviated a little bit. Music that is predictable, rhythmic, and with an even beat can also be calming. I think quality time is a really good one, and especially sometimes discussing things we have like positive memories or associations about can be very calming, and this is something you can do together. Some movement is calming, so slow and rhythmical movement, maybe with some resistance, because it gives heavy work to your muscles, which is very calming for the nervous system. So this could include exercise with body weights, or cycling and jogging up hills, or helping around the house with heavy things like laundry, or carrying shopping to the front door from the car, that kind of thing. As long as it's hard work for the body, and this is not prescriptive, like it depends on what exercise and movement activities they like, really. Things like squeezing a stress ball as well, it gives that kind of feedback to the body's muscles, which can be calming. And some of these activities are considered like deep pressure activities because they, like I've said, give a lot of pressure to the body. And other deep pressure activities are things like tight hugs, and pressing down firmly on your shoulders or on your head like this. So yeah, they can be really, really calming. And so can mindfulness and breath work, that Nili covered earlier and that you have the videos of. And I would recommend that once you kind of get used to some of these techniques and you found the things that work, that they're worked into your child's and your teenager's routine, so that you're kind of preempting when a trigger point happens, although it can be really helpful in the moment when they are really stressed, or maybe they've kind of had a bit of a big emotional reaction. It can also be really, really helpful to preempt it and have them happening regularly, so that you can they can stay calm and cope with the situations that arise. You might also have someone on the other end of the scale, which is kind of that low arousal I spoke about. So your teenager might be presenting as lethargic, they might be hard to wake up in the morning, maybe they're appearing to be in their own world, and when you talk to them, they barely register. You might feel like they have no urgency when they're doing a task. They might be moving slowly, getting their laptop out really slowly, opening it up slowly. It can be really, really frustrating. Or they might be doing their normal activities that they usually enjoy, but they might not really seem to be getting much satisfaction from them at the moment. They might seem a bit low. So it can be really hard at this point as well, and it can be really difficult when you're trying to communicate with them and find out what's going on, and you're wondering what's going on with them, and will they fall behind in work, and you might feel a bit like they're being lazy. I think it's important to remember that sometimes it's how our body is functioning, rather than a conscious decision. And again, there are some practical things you can do to kind of wake them up. So they're called alerting strategies, so strategies which alert the nervous system. So you can do movement activities, so fast and unpredictable. Kind of the best activities are things which change direction a lot. So it might be football, it might be some kind of dancing, interval running, with low resistance. So you wouldn't really have like heavy resistance like with the calming activities. Other alerting activities would be having a shower in the morning, particularly a cold shower can be really helpful. Fast moving, less predictable, and loud music. Obviously, you might not want it too loud. For example, jazz is a good example of that kind of music. Having bright lights, encouraging them to have their curtains open, lights on, can help you really stay alert. Anything that really wakes up your body. Changing a routine can also be really helpful. Having a bit of unpredictability within the routine. Adding spice to foods, crunchy foods, and also increasing input can be helpful. So, you know, more noise around, like we said, more light, having more conversation with the person. But yeah, I put stars around this one just to be a bit careful, because certain things can make someone feel more too alert, and that can also be bad, because it can make someone kind of go into the other side of that rainbow you saw. So just yeah, use with caution. They can be really helpful. So lastly, and I'm very aware of the time and I want to leave time for you guys to have questions, and I know we're running over, but I do think self-care is really important, and we've talked a lot about how you as parents can support your children, but we're very aware you can only do this if you're looking after yourself. And as we highlighted at the beginning, COVID has presented a number of new challenges, and none of us were prepared for this. And it's on top of all the stresses that a lot of us were already dealing with. We often use a stress bucket to help people think about their well-being. Imagine you have a bucket that you carry with you, and it slowly fills up with experiences of different types and different stresses. For example, work, homeschooling, financial stress, anxiety, uncertainty. And you may feel like often you're resilient enough to carry all these things. But if you're feeling vulnerable, they can build up. So your bucket may feel a bit smaller and fill up quicker. And if you don't use helpful coping strategies, your bucket can begin to overflow and problems can start to develop. So the tap signals the coping strategies that you might use, which can help reduce the stress and prevent your bucket from overflowing. So these coping strategies and self-care activities are going to be different for everyone, and it's about what's important to you and what helps you. And I know it's really hard to find time to do these things sometimes, and it can be just 10 to 15 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. But where possible, finding time for rest and relaxation, time to connect with others, breathing exercises and mindfulness. You can use the ones Nilly suggested. Yeah, and it's good modelling for your child as well, because they see how you're coping with your stress. Lastly, I just want to say that feeling stressed at this time is a really normal reaction to a really abnormal situation. It can also be very normal to be hard on ourselves and to think we should be doing more, or doing better, and comparing ourselves to others. And this can often make you feel even more stressed. So where possible, try and be compassionate to yourselves. Reduce the expectations and the criticism, and talk to yourself as if you were one of your close friends. And also try not to put too much pressure on the academic work. Most parents and carers aren't teachers, and it's okay to not be doing schoolwork for 6 hours a day. It might be more important to be spending time together and building relationships and enjoying shared activities, as opposed to replicating the school timetable. I think it's really important, if you feel like you're struggling, to please ask your child's school for advice. And they're all aware that it's a very difficult time as well, and there should be someone that can support you at school. And don't forget those basics. So eat and drink regularly, prioritize your sleep, exercise, and if you need it, do seek extra support, whether it's from friends or family, or more formal agencies. And on that note, this is just some information about our service. So in the Battersea team, we support different schools in Battersea, and if your child is in one of those schools, you can self-refer by the email address at the bottom, or you can speak to the mental health lead in your child's school, and they can support you to make a referral. And yeah, just to say that we offer support for teenagers who are struggling with anxiety, low mood, lack of motivation, and or sleep difficulties. Yeah, I think the main message is, please talk to your child's mental health lead if you're concerned about anything, and they should know who can support you with it. And then, any questions? I know we've really run over. I'm really sorry.
Can I just say stop recording?
Yeah.
If you have any questions,
Thank you, Lily. And please don't forget to fill out the feedback form as well before you leave.